And what we're seeing is a fundamental shift in what's happening with the technology. Now, you'll see at the bottom here, whoops, excuse me, the Prunty-Russo Media Lab. I'm the director, executive editor of student media. I'm the guy that gets to play with all the toys. I've got to thank Bob Stein for enabling this, his support, and I mean really active support for the Media Lab. But when I was named into that position, I felt like a kid who was turned loose in a toy store and said, you can touch everything. What the Media Lab is intended to do is to explore, experiment, create for students, faculty, staff, and members of the community. I've been in the communications business for 50 years. Started out as a journalist. And I've seen a lot of change over that time. Other piece of art done a couple of weeks ago by myself using AI that I did downstairs in the Media Lab. Something I did at home on my system a couple of days ago. It used Midjourney, which is an AI image generator, DALL-E 2, which is an AI image generator, DAZ Studio, which is a 3D computer graphics application, Gigapixel AI, which is a image enhancement technology that uses artificial intelligence, Photoshop that has AI built into it, and what are Actus sketch filters, which also use AI. And I did it on my desktop at home. Now, I admit it's kind of beefed up, but it's the kind of technology that is accessible to pretty much everybody, provided they've got a couple, $3,000 to, or if they've got a high-end game system. And I want to emphasize a game system. You can run these technologies on a gaming system.
Early in the 5th century BCE, the curator of the royal library became disenchanted with the selfishness of the people and the corruption of the government. He saw pain and misery all around him. He tried to bring about change, but faced stubborn resistance to even the most minor of reforms. In his frustration and disgust, the old man chose self-exile. He journeyed to the far western border of the country and to the edge of the civilized world. Before him lay vast mountains and plains, roamed by men and beasts that were unknown to even the most educated of his people. At a border post guarding the pass to the unknown, the old man was recognized and stopped by the commander of the garrison. The commander, an admirer of the old man's teachings, begged him to stay. When the old man refused, the commander implored him to leave a record of his knowledge and wisdom before going into the wilderness. The old man agreed. He wrote a small book in which he set out what he had learned over a lifetime. When the book was completed, the commander...
Anybody recognize that framework of that story? It's much older. It's about 3,000, perhaps 3,500 years old. It's Taoism. It was an experiment that I was doing. I typed in the script, used an AI to generate the narrative, the voiceover. There's just a few baubles in it that you can still notice. It's not human, but most humans have a few baubles in the things as well. other than those few, you know, very small, I wouldn't even call them defects at this point, those small points that you might notice, from my perspective, that narration is pretty good. May not be absolutely 100% human in terms of its sound, but we're in the early days of this technology. And this too has evolved very rapidly.
Early in the 5th.
So what we're talking about with art, and I use the broadest definition of art, still images, whether they're photographs, paintings, sketches, whatever they are, music, writing, literature, poetry, nonfiction writing, the human voice. You saw some narration. There are also AI apps that are basically doing singing. They're not very good yet, but again, that's going to change. We're near to having the ability to create video clips by typing in text prompts. Give me a scene that does this, that shows this. And performing arts. Anybody want to, you know, create a dance? If you know anything about choreography and notation, if it hasn't happened already, I expect that very soon, and I don't even know what it's called, you know, the notation though for dance will be fed into a system to train an AI, and then you tell it using a text prompt or something else, I'd like to have a dance that does this. And it will generate the choreography for you. You saw, if you came in a little bit early, a couple of demonstrations in which virtual artists were playing the piano, including Rachmaninoff, where a recording of a 1919 piece that he did was simulated, showing the finger and hand movements on a piano keyboard. That's what we're talking about. As I noted, AI is already embedded in many of the software tools that we're using. And again, week by week, things are changing. I'm used to trying to keep up with the pace of technology, and it's overwhelming at this point. Generative AI, which is the images, the music that you've seen and heard here, is content that's created by artificial intelligence applications that generate text, images, music, and so on after being trained looking at a bunch of images, for example, or music, or writing. They're the ones that are getting all the news right now. The I don't know how many of you have heard about the AI application that was used to win a contest, art contest in Colorado. That I think is the trigger event in terms of people realizing this stuff is upon us. It's here. It's no longer just an experiment, you know, in a lab someplace. It's actually here. And it's scary good in some cases. AI art isn't art, some people say. And I want to get rid of that argument right off the top because it's a distraction. The reason it's a distraction is there are a couple of solid reasons for arguing that it can be art. But the biggest reason it's a distraction is it doesn't deal with the reality that this stuff is here. And that's not going to change. It's not going away. Conceptual art, intellectual, it's in service of the mind. Marcel Duchamp, my hero. Mainly because he basically lets me get away with anything in colored art. Retinal art, the stuff that attracts the eye, the visual impact. What is AI art? Is it conceptual art? Is it intellectual? Is it in service of the mind? Is it just retinal art? The storm images that you saw are basically from my memory growing up on the Canadian prairies, what the land, what the environment felt like. And I don't know whether or not you get a sense of that landscape, of that environment, of those experiences by looking at that. But if you do, then I've probably hit the conceptual art element of this. I think it's also hit the retinal art element. Duchamp. That's art. He says it is. And you can argue all you want. And I'm sure a lot of people have. Is that art? Well, art is what is defined by the artist. And who defines what an artist is? I don't think we want to go down that road. I don't want to define who you are as artists. I don't want you to define me, as to whether or not I'm an artist. If I choose to call myself an artist, a writer, a photographer, and I actually do some of those things, then let me define myself as I wish. And I will let you define yourself as you wish. Tolstoy, to evoke in oneself a feeling, one has had once experienced, and having evoked it in oneself, then by means of movements, lines, colors, sounds, or forms expressed in words, so to transmit that feeling, others may experience the same feeling. That is the activity of art. In other words, I have an experience, I express it in some way, you see that expression, hear that expression, feel that expression, and if you pick up that feeling, what I've done is an activity called art. So, are we going to argue about it being art? Have at it if you want, but I've got bigger questions for you. Is this art? This is a rendition of my experience of a Canadian prairie winter. Again, growing up in Alberta. Pacific Coast, done using AI. Let me give the context of this in the next couple of images. These were done the evening after the announcement of the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade. Does anybody experience anything? Any sense of feeling that comes from that? And oh, by the way, I told the AI to generate different styles. And I did it in the form of text prompts. Now, writing good prompts is a challenge in and of itself, which I'm not going to get into today. It's almost an art form in itself. It's an artistic technique. Like brushwork would be how you play an instrument. It's part of a technique. Okay, AI has limits to what it can do, but as I've already said, it's changing, and it's changing rapidly, and it's changing month by month, week by week, and sometimes day by day. Couple of examples of where it didn't quite work. Dolly 2, I asked it to do some images for some writing that I'm doing about environmental issues. And I've had this image in my mind for a long time of a young girl standing on a sand dune looking out over what used to be her home. Not quite getting there with these images. We got the sand dunes, but Dolly 2, when I did this, was not very good at rendering human figures. That changed day before yesterday. And I haven't had a chance yet to go back and try these prompts and see what's going on. This is an image I did about 3 months ago, same sort of theme. Dolly 2, I had to do multiple renders of different components of the scene. I had to cut them, stitch them together, fix them up in Photoshop. Last week, Dolly 2 allowed us to do what's called in-painting, where I would take and blank out an area and tell it what to fill in there. And it let me do out-painting, where I would go to the edge of a scene and say, extend it out and show me this. So again, what was a flaw, several months ago, has more or less been fixed, updated in terms of what you can do. Again, I haven't had the time to go back and redo this image. Where are we? Going into sort of my technology foresight futurist mode. Technologies typically advance in a form of an S-curve: performance, vertical axis, time, horizontal axis. Performance tends to increase over time. And you can call performance, define performance in more specific ways. So we're looking at an S-curve. The tail on this, at the beginning was long, decades long. That's changed. And here's about where we are, I think, on the S-curve. Folks, we ain't seen nothing yet. The questions that we need to ask ourselves are many. And right now, I've got far more questions than I've got answers. And I think those of you who are artists, faculty, students, human beings living in our society need to be able to, come to grips with what this technology means and create the answers to these questions. Every technology brings with it winners and losers. Who benefits and who doesn't? Fundamental question. With AI and art, are the artists going to benefit or not? How many of you like being starving artists? It really sucks. Been there, done that. I'd rather get paid for my work. Unfortunately, artists are undervalued in our society for no reason that I can actually comprehend. People don't go to museums because they want to look at the engineering of the plumbing. They go there for the art. People don't visit Europe for the most part, as I did when I visited the Soviet Union back in '96. All of this great art, and they took me to the Leningrad at that point, garbage processing facility, which they were very proud of. Garbage processing facilities are great, but dang, there were other things I really wanted to see. So we need to ask ourselves, how are we as artists going to benefit from this? How are our students going to benefit from this? My big fear is that the big corporations will say, hey, AI, I can write this and I can paint that and I can create this music for my commercials, and the hell with all you artists. You're out of the picture. Don't need you. Is that an irrational fear? I don't think so. I think it's a fear that we need to recognize could have a basis in reality. We've seen what the internet, we've seen what Facebook, Google, you know, the big corporations that dominate the relatively new technology of the internet. We've seen what's happened to writers, visual artists, musicians. Google and Facebook get the profits. The rest of us, we get the crumbs, if that. Something's got to change. Now we've got to deal with AI. So how do we respond? As I said, as faculty, what do we need to prepare our students for? What do we need to give them in terms of knowledge and skills? AI is going to de-skill certain tasks. Like I said earlier, I know nothing about music. I would love to take a music theory class so I know what the heck I'm doing. Haven't got around to that yet, but at some point I will. I teach writing, I teach transmedia storytelling, and there are fundamentals that at this point AI cannot handle. It cannot deal with them. And we need to start giving our students those basics. If we're talking about images, composition, color theory, you know, all of the stuff that we would go through in basically a foundational class of graphic arts, fine arts, or whatever. Music theory. You know, what is dance? Other than just people moving around on a stage. If we give our students a fundamental understanding of some of these things, I think we're all better served. They'll be able to distinguish hack AI art from stuff that is truly good or great art. AI will allow non-experts to create higher quality work. I teach in communication studies. The students I've got are into writing, photography, graphic art, stuff like that. What about the engineering students? The students in the so-called hard sciences. We're in a world where we've got a problem with the public, for one, understanding a lot of science. And I can tell the story of science, but isn't it somewhat better that an expert scientist on climate change is able to tell an effective story themselves? And not just one, but a handful, dozens, hundreds are able to tell a coherent story. This ability to have non-experts create works, I think, may be perceived as a threat, but I think there's also a real benefit to society as a whole if we've got people who are much more literate in the arts. It drives me crazy that we've got the hard sciences and the soft skills, when the soft skills, quote, are some of the hardest skills you can develop and to implement. Gen Eds, who needs that? I'm gonna go do something, you know, I'm gonna invent something, I'm gonna do an AI, I'm gonna, you know, program AIs. Well, here we are, AI and art. Oughtn't the person programming it also have some understanding of what the heck they're doing and what art is? Do we want non-artists to access these tools? And I've had people say to me in discussions, well, you need to go get a degree in fine arts if you want to call yourself an artist. Well, that leaves me out. I've got a degree in journalism. I've got a master's in future studies. I've got another master's in information design, but I've taken some art history courses, but I don't have a fine arts degree. Not that I wouldn't like to get one, but again, it's a matter of time. Do we say, no, this is all for us. You can't play in this garden? Well, I think that's a non-solution as well. What do we want to teach these non-experts about art so that they can engage in it? AI is going to take out the intermediaries between content creators and consumers. And we've seen it in an industry that I'm very familiar with, writing and publishing. The chain used to be something like this: author, agent, editor, designer, layout specialist. I missed the printers in there. You've got the publisher doing the distribution, the marketing, and so on. Then ultimately, you've got the reader. Well, hey, look at all the stuff that's disappeared in between. Over the summer, I produced a textbook for, shameless plug, the transmedia storytelling class I'm doing next semester. Published it myself. Why? One, I wanted to. Two, I really hate students having to pay $200 for a textbook. So students in my transmedia class are going to get the PDF for free. And if they want the hard copy, it's $9.99 on Amazon. No need to buy it if you've got the PDF, but it's sometimes nice to have a physical copy. I got rid of all of that in between. And that wasn't even using AI technology. So who and what in your field of art will be disintermediated? What's going to disappear? Who's going to disappear between the creator and the consumer? Is it you? Where do you move in that area so you are not out of the loop? Where do you try and place your students so they're not out of the loop when they graduate or into and working in a world where all of this stuff is available for cheap or free? What are the basic skills and knowledge needed in your field of art? How does somebody know this is a good piece of music versus a bad piece of music? What is the theory? And does that mean we're going to get rid of all the people who play instruments? Not really. We've been mass producing ceramics for well over a century. That doesn't mean ceramic artists are totally gone. We've just got different purposes. I go get my Corning ware because I'm going to use it day to day in my kitchen. And then I get the artwork from the local artists. There's a displacement, yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean artists are gone. What do you need to do? You need to know what this stuff is. What is this technology? How do you use it? You need to know how to use it. Even just the basics. And in knowing those two things, you can begin to understand its strengths and its weaknesses. And as you understand those strengths and weaknesses, you can start to shape the evolution of the technology. We're early on in that S curve. Things are changing rapidly. there's still an opportunity to bring about significant change before everything gets cooked into place. It's much easier to change the direction, shape the direction of the future now than it will be a decade from now. What I'm about to show you, and this is sort of the wrap up, I did this 6 months ago, state-of-the-art technology that's now essentially obsolete. You're looking at 6-month-old technology. And again, I haven't had time to update this, but the quality of the images definitely can be substantially improved. Now, what are you all going to do with this? Are you going to argue whether it's art or not? Have at it if you want, but as I noted, that argument is really futile. There's no point to it. So the question to you is, what are you all going to do? How are you going to deal with this? Questions, anybody? Yeah.
Can I ask, Beth Ann, could you use the microphone?
That was a great topic, Peter. Thank you. So some of us are interested in that question, I'll say, because we think it has actual consequences. But a couple of things struck me, and one, which is the part that you're not interested in, that when you talked about the prompt and what it takes to write that prompt, I actually think it's possible that that's where the art is, rather than like in the image or the visual. And then the other thing that really struck me is how much this group of issues is similar to when photography was developed. And I wondered if you saw that similarity too.
Yeah, the last part first. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels to photography, cinematography, film, and what happened with painting or stuff on the stage. The first part, I'm actually fascinated with the prompt part. The problem is that's a whole other forum, or even better, that's a workshop we're going to do in the Media Lab at some point. Shameless plug. Open to faculty and students and the community. The prompt, though, writing the prompts is a critical part. And I think we can use the development of prompts as a way of actually getting people, students, for example, in classes, to think critically about something. You take a piece of literature, and the assignment is, here are all the words. Now, with the use of an AI or something else, draw me a picture of this particular scene, the Yorkshire Moors during an English winter. What do they look like? What do they sound like? What does that make you feel like? So the development of the prompts is a really critical aspect of putting these technologies together, putting these images, I should say, together. And it requires some thought. It does require some experience with the technologies. And I think there are real opportunities for, people to figure out how to use prompts just the way some artists may figure out how to use brushes and brush strokes or a camera and do photography and so on. Other questions? Yeah.
One question and one comment.
Yeah.
My comment, even 3 years ago, there was a paper in Nature that was describing how a AI machine learning was programmed with a huge collection of abstracts from scientific papers and then turned loose, and it was able to predict other discoveries that were not in the abstracts it read, including things that we had not yet discovered. And I thought that was really cool and also an extension of this. And my question, if you put the same prompt in more than once, does the output change?
Yes, in most cases. Getting in a little technical on this, with these technologies, they use a random seed. They randomize what the inputs are, and that random seed is part of it. If you copy that number and paste it back in, it will give you, and I've never really tried it, but theoretically at least, it should give you the exact output that you've already got. Everything else being the same. It is difficult right now to replicate from one image to another. If you've got a character, for example, teenage girl standing in in the prairie facing a storm, and then I go on to something else if I'm doing a scene, I have difficulty at this point replicating the visual aspects of that particular character. That said, there are already published examples of comic books that have been using AI art. Most of them are developed with the use of AI for landscapes as opposed to specific objects or specific individuals. That's changing too. And I think it's just a matter of time before techniques are made available to us that give us much more control over what we're doing. Yeah.
Everyone be quick with their questions and answers because we've got only a few minutes.
So to Beth Ann's remembrance of photography about 18 years ago, when I was really involved in a lot of online art communities and producing and selling my own art, I remember there was a huge debate and discussion about tons of digital art that had flooded the market and use of Photoshop and Adobe, and people were upset and feeling threatened. And now this is just, an evolution, another stage of this. And I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing. As you said, it's what we're going to do with it. So my questions are, I guess I'm curious in terms of time, if you could give us some estimates for how long it took you to produce some of the examples that you've given us in terms of the time investment for an individual piece, whether music or visual art, and also maybe a broad estimate of how long it might take someone in terms of training and studying and skill to gain the knowledge to produce these kinds of images. And maybe, sorry, third question, what is it like? What is the work like when you're producing this art?
Well, answer to the last part first. It can get addictive. I find it fascinating to see what is produced. How long the pieces of music, for example, this piece here, I generated the prompt and it took about 30 seconds. What took more time was it generated 5 different iterations, different variations. And if I didn't like those, it generated another 5. It took me longer to sort through what I actually liked than to actually produce it. The music itself, you can probably produce this kind of stuff in under a minute. The artwork, the stuff you're seeing right here, it was a slow application. It took about 5 minutes. The Midnight Journey stuff at the top, just the straight AI component, 60 seconds. Now, there's a lot of editing that went into some of those. And that's what we're talking about in terms of timeframes. How long does it take to learn this stuff? I could get you started in a 50-minute workshop. And then it depends on how much time you want to spend experimenting and getting addicted and saying, hey, this is pretty cool. Let me try something else. Does that answer the question? Any other questions?
Hi, Peter. Thank you. I wondered, you showed us the S-curve, the prediction of how
Yep.
the technology will improve over time. I wondered if you had any predictions about what might happen to get us to the end of this middle period of rapid improvement. Are there things you have in mind that you think would conceptually would limit the rate of improvement? Are there particular ideas about what AI is going to hit that's going to stop it from continuing to improve?
There are a couple of factors. The biggest one, though, is if you're able to generate a 4K digital image that's photorealistic, that's pretty much good enough. And when we achieve that, which we may already be there, improvement in that area isn't necessary. So there are a variety of characteristics that you need to take a look at, and you start to look at them individually. 5K, or pardon me, 8K, we want to do images, super fine resolution, photorealistic. Okay, that may take a couple of years. What's more difficult is the integration of these. This demonstration, I was testing out concepts of how can you put together a piece of video that uses AI-generated visuals, uses AI-generated art. And that's somewhat more complex. And I think that's where we humans, we artists still have an advantage. I don't think AI at this point is able to do an effective job of integrating the music with the visuals and the narration with the visuals. And that may take a number of years. That may be something, depending on the sophistication of the product you're creating, may take decades. That's where we as artists, that's where we as faculty need to really focus our efforts, is how are we going to shape not what's happening now, but what's happening in the future. To effectively add music to this, I really ought to have some music theory. And I ought to have some idea of what the heck film scoring is all about, which Nick Schlegel has told me at some point he will educate me on that. So there are a lot of those things. I'm experimenting, for example, with AI. How do you structure a story? Plot points. How do you come up with the idea? Is there a structured way of doing that? Can an AI assist you on that? If there's anybody that's into AI and computer science and wants to partner up, let's talk. I've got the concepts from the writing side. I don't have the skills from the programming side. But that's part of, I think, what we need to do as artists and faculty as well. Get out of our silos, get out of our studios, our cold attics, wherever we happen to be, and partner with the people who are helping develop this technology.
Peter.
Yep.
We're getting close to time.
Okay.
But before I thank Peter for, I just want to make a couple of comments. I'm just going to abuse my prerogative here, because it's such a thought-provoking topic. And so if I could make a couple of comments. One is, you often get this philosophical question, what is art? And my view is it's always a badly formulated question because people mistake two questions and they converge them. There's what is art and there's what is good art. So for instance, here's a poem. The Berggren Forum is very, very good. Should people come to it? Yes, they should. Is that a poem? Yes. Is it a good poem? No, it's just a bad poem. And a huge amount of the question, what is art, and that couldn't be reduced to, we're talking about what is good art. But the second thing that's kind of related that I think is really interesting is that there's some things that we really don't mind being produced by AI. Like if I had a choice between an AI-designed microwave or a computer-designed microwave, and I was told that the AI-designed microwave was more reliable, and I'd go for the AI-designed microwave. But there's some areas of human activity, like a good example is, say, chess playing. You know, we've now got artificial intelligence, we've got, you know, computers that can beat human beings, but we're still interested in what the human beings do, not in what the computers get. We are interested in it, but not as much interested. And if they designed a robot that can run really fast, we're not interested in the robot Olympic Games as much as the human Olympic Games. And that's kind of interesting. And I think that relates to this question of AI art versus human-generated art. We still somehow want art to be expressive of human minds, human endeavors, human activities, human feelings, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. And the third thing I was going to say, there was a really interesting article in the Chronicle of Higher Education this week about AI-generated writing. And it's, as you say, you couldn't be more right that things are moving very, very fast. And it's certainly a problem for instance, professors trying to assign writing because AI can now write essays on the basis of a single prompt.
Yeah, yes, it can. And I just a quick example, and then I'll turn you loose. I used an AI to write the dialogue in a scene for a movie script. Now, it took a lot of intervention, but I then handed it to Nick Schlegel and said, so if this were your student, what would you grade this at? He said a B+. And then he said, oh, maybe people will think that's grade inflation, so I'll say a B. But my take on it was B+.
Well, we need to finish. So let's thank Nick for a very thought-provoking presentation. Sorry, I said much.